Dear friends, I am living in Europe since 50 years. Never before I witnessed such a climate of suspicion between Muslims living in Europe and mainstream European societies. And we have been preoccupied by this poisonous development, mainly in the last years. And we wanted to chart a new course out of this climate. Hence the idea to organize this seminar in the beginning of 2015. IEMed, under the chairmanship of Senator Florenza, provided energy, support, advice, encouragement. And Lourdes has been the linchpin of this initiative. I have prepared a paper for a kick-off paper for this seminar. It is available outside. It tackles the major issues which we shall deal with without the pretense of laying the groundwork, theoretical groundwork of the complex issues and questions we shall address. I shall only, for the sake of clarity and brevity, skip through the paper very quickly, and I shall pick up only 4 questions very rapidly. First of all, who are the Muslims of Europe? Second question, how many are they and where? Third question, how come that some young, homegrown European Muslims get radicalized and a tiny fringe of them engage in violent actions and terrorism? Fourth question, how could we explain the surge of Islamophobia in most European countries? I leave other issues tackled in the paper aside in order not to encroach on the agenda of our seminar. Certainly, we shall come back to all these questions in the various sessions with enriching insights from our colleagues here who will probably add with different disciplinary and geographic perspectives. Let me answer the first question very rapidly. It is the easiest. Who are the Muslims in Europe? Well, they fall under the different categories. We have the indigenous Muslims who had lived in Europe for many centuries, and where Islam is the foundational element of their history. I am referring to Bosnia, to Bosnians, to Albanians, to Kosovars, specifically. But you have also Muslim communities living since many centuries in Romania, in Bulgaria, even Tatars in Poland, in Crimea. Yeah. Well, second category are businessmen and students who come from various Muslim countries. Only in France, you have 70,000 university students from North Africa registered in French universities. You have Muslims who entered initially without restriction, such as the Commonwealth citizens. You have Muslims who came to Western Europe in the 50s and 60s as labor migrants. You have European Muslims who are born from migrant parents. And finally, you have the asylum seekers and refugees. Only this year, we had some 1 million arrivals in Italy, in Greece, and this is the daily coverage of the newspapers. So I do not include here the 30 million Muslims of the Russian Federation. How much are they? Well, I found many estimates. In a Spanish newspaper, they spoke about 43 million. In Ideas Afkar, they spoke also about 40 millions. The real figure does not exceed the 22 to 23 million Muslims living in the 28 European countries today. The vast majority of them live in France, 5 to 6 million, Germany, 4 million, England, obviously, between 3 million and 3,100,000. And you have more than 1 million in Spain, 1,000,006 in Italy, 1 million in Belgium. So to put it in a nutshell, we are speaking about a total population which represents 5% of the total population of Europe. Are these figures threatening? Because there is a wide sentiment in Europe that Europe is being invaded by a growing Muslim population that cannot and will not be, say the opponents, be assimilated, and that dreams, just take one blogger who says, these Muslims dream of implementing Sharia law in Europe and making this infidel continent part of the domain of Islam. This is what you can find in internet, in bloggers. So this is the figures, and this is the distribution. We deal here mostly with Muslims who came as labor migrants. Now, I am not going to dwell on that issue. Already Senan has tackled the issue from Spanish and from European perspectives, taking Spain as an example of immigrants and immigrants. So it was interesting to recall to the Spanish that the Spaniards migrated in great numbers in different parts of the world. Well, here Muslims came as labor workers. Arabs and Berbers from North Africa immigrated to France, ex-colonial power. Indonesian Surinamese went to Holland. Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, and from Kashmiris went to England. And Turks and Kurds went to Germany. Although Germany has not been a colonial power, but the friendship between Germany and Turkey has historical roots. All these migrants came without the intent to settle permanently. They hoped to accumulate sufficient savings to make a winning return to their countries of origin. In the 50s, 60s, and even until 1973, and I was already in Belgium, there was no migration problem and no a Muslim problem in Europe. But when the economic boom in Europe came to a halt in the 70s, European countries enacted laws to restrict regular migration, at the same time enacted other laws to encourage family reunification. This family reunification, well, produced some quantitative and qualitative effects. Quantitative, the stock of migrants in Europe almost tripled in the 80s and in the 90s. The qualitative is that we had a process of feminization of migrants, a process of the presence of children, which means the first generation, the second generation, and later the third generation. And we had more visibility of migrants in the public space. Women go shopping, children go to school, and this visibilization triggered a reaction, negative reaction. Some people called it racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, but there has been a reaction in the various European communities with regard to people who are not here as guest workers, but who are already there and settling in a sort of family migration. And this happens in a delicate juncture of internal European crisis, high rates of unemployment, and unemployment affecting the first generation of migrants and the second generation of migrants, and a perceived Islamic fundamentalist revival. Factors that generated the surge of extreme right, xenophobic. Islam became really, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, an issue. A problem, an Islamic problem has been constructed. Now, all the countries have not the same itinerary and the same history. Obviously, migration in England is old. Family reunification, for example, in England, as I have been told by Jürgen yesterday, started in the 60s, while in Belgium it started in the 70s, some years later. That's why, for example, the problem of Islamic practices, mainly women veil, is less problematic in England than in other places. And in Spain, well, Spain and Italy, who used to be sources of migration, have become first transit countries and secondly countries of final destination. In 1992, there were some 50,000 Moroccans documentados, asentados. Today, the last statistics give the figure of 750,000, which is a multiplication by 15. This trend is, as Stefano knows well, has been almost similar in Italy, with the presence of more than 1,600,000, if I understood your figure yesterday. Well, those Muslims do not constitute a community. Speaking about Muslim community is a fantasy. They speak different languages, they come from different countries, they are settled in different countries, and they are different in ethnically, confessionally, and in their relation to religion. Polls show that only 10% are frequent mosques, mosques on a regular basis. Although 70% participate or make the fast of Ramadan, but it is much more a social event than a religious content, but they are very different. So we cannot speak about Muslim community. Yet, when we speak about Muslims, and when you see the polls, like the poll of 2014, Europeans tend to exaggerate the percentage of Muslims in their respective countries. For example, a poll 2014 gave the figure, when the French asked how many Muslims live in France, they said almost 31% of French are Muslims, while the real figure does not exceed 8 to 9%. When they spoke to Germans, Germans think that 19 to 20% of Germans are Muslims, where the real figure does not exceed 5%. So there is an over-exaggeration of the numbers in order, to convey the impression that there is invasion, Muslim invasion of Europe. Third question. Radicalization. This is a very complex issue. How people get radicalized has been object of tens of books and research, think tank research and reports. I shall not, dwell in depth with this issue. There are two schools of thought, which I saw in the newspapers. In one school of thought, and there has been 2 or 3 articles in Spanish newspapers. One school of thought adopts a culturalist view, which links terrorism, jihadism, extremism, and radicalization to the Islamic religion itself. For its proponents, violence is consubstantial to Islam itself. Second school of thought, which I may consider as realist, asserts that the failure of European governments to fully integrate Muslim communities leaves some European Muslims more vulnerable to jihadi ideology. None of these two arguments seems convincing. First, to assert that violence and Islam are concomitant or consubstantial is an assertion which is erroneous intellectually and historically. There is no a religion of the, what we call in French, la religion de l'épée, espada, et il n'y a pas une religion de la paix, épée, la paix. To assume that Islam is la religion de l'épée, of violence, and Christianity, Judaism, or Buddhism are religion de la paix, religions of peace, is historically misleading and erroneous. The second argument, which is the realist argument, is neither credible. There are millions of immigrants who suffer from segregation, discrimination, or lack of opportunities, but who do not engage in terrorist activities. Therefore, we shall find other explanations. I will not obviously go in depth in all these explanations, speaking about the root causes of radicalization or the processes of radicalization. But in my opinion, I can pick up four types of radicalization, of the process of radicalization. First is an identity-based radicalization. For many young Muslims, there is a feeling that they are not fully accepted, although they may be of the third generation. They are not accepted as full-fledged citizens. After 3 generations, a French citizen of Algerian descent is still perceived as an Algerian and as a Muslim. Youth feel torn between a country of origin they don't know and their home countries that turn their backs to them. It is a question of perception. The second factor is what I call the socioeconomic based radicalization. This radicalization is related to socioeconomic grievances harbored by second and third generation. Undoubtedly, lack of opportunities is linked to objective failures like poor education and training, others to job discrimination, and so on and so forth. The third factor may be the search of a mission. In many cases, we saw terrorists who became suddenly and fervently self-radicalized and fanatically religious, although they are totally illiterate in themes of religion, breaking off from their family and friends and embodying what Olivier Roy called a generation rupture, what others called identity rupture. These self-radicalized youth pursue a fantasy of heroism, tragic heroism, which I called in the paper the passage from zero to hero, or the passage from anonymity to celebrity. We have avenged the Prophet Muhammad, said the terrorist who killed the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. This self-radicalization is partly due to persistent socioeconomic challenges, but also to the exposure of social media and to satellite television, much of it generously financed by petrodollars. The fourth argument, the fourth argument is, or factor, is geopolitical and based radicalization, geopolitics-based radicalization. This relates to the constant exposure of some young Muslims in Europe to the sufferings inflicted by the West or by its allies, Muslim and Arab allies in the region itself, in many parts of the Arab and Muslim worlds, it is not fortuitous that Al-Qaeda and later ISIS increased their activities in Iraq after the American invasion in 2003. And obviously, the 3 Israeli offensives in Gaza has also produced a resentment. Well, this very brief and sketchy, in the paper they are more elaborate. This overview raises the question of the complexity of the causal factors that are responsible for causing radicalization, and there is an interplay between contextual processes and social and psychological processes. I think that in our discussion we shall come back to these issues. The last question is Islamophobia. Let us reiterate an undeniable fact. Since 1711, Islam and Muslims have obsessed and captured the European imagination, first as conquerors, second as religious competitors, and finally as the internal other, with the new waves of migration. But what is amazing is that Islamophobia is not fading in the 21st century. On the contrary, it is gaining salience. Why? Well, here again, there is no consensus among intellectuals about the factors that trigger this modern Islamophobia. Many intellectuals, Muslims or non-Muslims, are convinced that Islamophobia is the natural outcome of extreme violence in Muslim countries, anti-Western terrorist attacks, reprehensible behavior of some groups of migrants, and the radicalization of some young, homeborn European Muslims. Other intellectuals claim that the West's disdain of Islam and Muslims has historic roots and is ingrained in Europe's culture of superiority. Others go by arguing that a well-structured and well-financed Islamophobic industry has managed to capture public opinion without serious contestation. In this regard, some media, including electronic media, are pinpointed to as major contributors to the surge of Islamophobia. All these claims, in my mind, are debatable, as they oversimplify a complex issue. There is plenty of cruelty in the world, and religiously motivated violence has erupted in many places, from Myanmar to the Palestinian territories to other places in the world. So we cannot accept the argument that Islamophobia is the product of the violence in the Muslim worlds, in Muslim countries. The argument that Western vilification of Islam is inherent to Western culture is also a gross exaggeration. Because we consider, well, this school of thought considers the West as a monolith, incapable of empathy and trapped forever in a sort of closed views of Islam and Muslims. This is historically erroneous, since many European intellectuals have come to the defense of Muslims in the past and in the present times. See the book of Plenel from Mediapart, published in France in 2014, Pour les Musulmans. While speaking about an Islamic industry, Islamophobic industry, might suppose that there is a sort of intellectual, a political conspiracy against Islam and Muslims, which is something I am not fond of. What is sure is that Islamophobia is related to identity politics, since it allows the adherents to construct their identity in opposition to a negative image of Muslims, their culture and religion. The permanent settlement of Muslim migrants or Muslims of migrant origin in Europe has brought the outside inside and has transformed Islam and Muslims into a domestic issue and an internal supposed threat. In a context in which European states are facing an identity crisis, an economic slump, a high rate of unemployment, all these events could only rekindle anti-Islamic sentiment. Europe's Islam has become a scapegoat and a scarecrow. It is not therefore that the best sellers in Europe have been Oriana Fallaci, L'Orgoglio, La Rabbia e l'Orgoglio, Thilo Sarrazin, Deutschland schafft ich ab, our German friends know that, Hulbeck, Soumission, Christopher Galdwell, Reflections on the Revolution in Europe, Immigration, Islam and the West, and Bruce Bauer, While Europe Slept, How Radical Islam is Destroying the West from Within. This is the kind of literature which is becoming bestseller in the libraries in many European countries. At the popular level, anti-Islam sentiment is also dramatically increasing, as revealed by a special study in Islam by Bertelsmann Foundation, taking Germany as case study in 2014. Public opinion survey shows the following alarming percentages. 57% of Germans believe that Islam poses a threat. 61% are convinced that Islam is incompatible with the West. 40% say that because of Islam, I feel as a stranger in my country. Muslim countries will be ill-advised to ignore these percentages and these opinions, because they are also responsible for the degradation of the image of Islam and Muslims. They cannot simply shun their responsibility by sidestepping the issue and suggesting that Islamophobia is a sort of incurable Western illness, or that Islamist terrorists and jihadists, such as the European native jihadists, do not represent real Islam or even tarnish the image of Islam, which is a religion of peace. This argument is politically correct, but it is self-serving and not credible. After all, radical Islam is the religious form through which a particular kind of political rage expresses itself. It is somehow the voice of protest against the states that failed to live up to their pledges, against the prevailing acquiescence and enemy of their societies, and against the ruling elites in the Muslim countries who harnessed religion in the service of political power. Well, this is, my dear friend, a sketchy kick-off summary of my paper. Again, with saying welcome to this seminar, hoping that it will be fruitful, amicable, and certainly in this magnificent town of Barcelona you will enjoy, and we shall enjoy the debates in this seminar. Thank you very much.